So I'm going to be taking a look at a few historical stories in today's episode. We're going to be looking at tank aces of the Second World War. I'll take a look at 3 or 4 stories, things that I think DICE could really include in Battlefield 5 as sort of background for certain events and battles, albeit some aren't actually in the game. I really think as if this would assist people in not only learning more about what happened in World War II, but just gaining an interest in the sort of things that they are almost replicating when they play Battlefield. You can find links to these stories down below in the description. I am reading some straight from these sources, some I've put together myself. They are all historically accurate as far as I'm aware, and some of my pronunciations are a bit loose. But that aside, it's very interesting to listen to actually see what happened all those years ago. Today we have the interesting story of Otto Carius, a German World War II tank ace who witnessed the single finest shot ever taken in a tank in any war. According to Carius' autobiography, his gunner once took down an enemy fighter plane with the tank's main gun. The gunner's name was Kramer and the fighter was Russian. Here is an extract from Otto Carius' book, Tigers in the Mud. My gunner can take credit for a deed that was probably unparalleled on the Eastern Front. That is, he succeeded in shooting down a Russian fighter with the tank cannon. Of course, he was also helped by chance. This is how it happened. Kramer, upset in the unrelenting nuisance, elevated his cannon along the approach route. I talked him in, he took a chance, and pulled the trigger. On the second attempt, he hit one of the bees in its wing. The Russian crashed behind us. On the same day we received yet another breather. 2 Russians collided and tore each other apart before crashing. I wonder what it was like to get shot down in a plane, never mind being hit from the ground by a tank shell. Sure, it's something we see in Battlefield from time to time, but it's very rare to see in real life. Another story from a German ace, Helmut Lipfert, tells us that he was once shot by a Soviet AT gun, which isn't quite the same, but is still fairly similar when it comes to something that's not designed for taking down planes. It tore a big hole in his wing, but he somehow managed to fly home. This is documented in his war diary. An interesting story from December 1942. As part of Operation Uranus, a Soviet counterattack to encircle Stalingrad, a Soviet tank corps broke through German lines and reached a German airfield in Tatsinskaya. The airfield was occupied by hundreds of the Luftwaffe's transport aircraft, mostly Junkers J-52s. The battle for that airfield soon descended into utter chaos as the German aircraft all tried to take off as quickly as possible, whilst being shot at by Russian T-34s. Most aircraft were destroyed on the ground, but the Russian tanks also shot down several aircraft as they were taking off. The Russian tankers described the experience as shooting at a flock of panicked geese. As the Russian tanks were running low on ammunition, several of them resorted to ramming the parked German planes. In the end, the Germans lost at least 72 planes, which accounted for 10% of their total transport fleet. The Russians claimed to have destroyed over 300 planes, which is a bit ludicrous considering the entire airfield never held as many aircraft and 100 German planes were said to have escaped. Sometimes in Battlefield 5 you do get overwhelmed by enemy tanks, and it can be a tricky scenario to deal with. The German Tiger has sealed its reputation during World War II, with many incredible commanders recording unbelievable feats. One such story was from Franz Staudinger. His story begins on the first day of the Battle of Kursk, July 5th. After a day of heavy fighting, Staudinger moved to rejoin his unit by night. En route, he encountered a tank along the road, with its commander standing in the turret, smoking a cigarette. When he dismounted his Tiger to tell him to move out of the way, he soon realised it was actually a Russian T-34 tank, and this spelt bad news for him. Thinking quickly, he threw a grenade into the open hatch, destroying the tank. At this point, he noticed yet another Russian tank right next to the first one. He ran over to that as well, and as the crew opened their hatches to see what was going on, he tossed a second hand grenade into this tank and destroyed it. For the destruction of 2 tanks in close combat, he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class. This was an amazing story, but it was only the beginning. 3 days after this incident, the Russian 10th Tank Corps launched an attack on the German 1st SS Panzer Division. They struck them at a time when the majority of the division's tanks were fighting further west and were unavailable to assist in halting the attack. The only exceptions were two damaged Tigers, commanded by Franz Staudinger and Rolf Schamp. Despite damage to the tank's tracks and running gear, the crews were able to complete some quick repairs so to at least make the Tigers mobile, and they decided to then try and defeat the impending armoured assault. While Schamp guarded his flank, Staudinger rolled out of the town where he was stationed and drove to the front lines. He arrived just as the leading Russian tanks were overrunning the German infantry. In short order, his gunner, Heinz Buchner, destroyed the three visible Russian tanks. However, at that moment, two more Russian tanks emerged from behind an embankment and started to fire. These were also destroyed. Staudinger's driver, Stahlmacher, manoeuvred the tank quickly to face the new threat. As more and more Russian tanks emerged from behind the embankment, they were destroyed, one by one, until Staudinger and his crew had destroyed 17 altogether. It was at this point that Staudinger's tank had actually run out of armour-piercing shells. Despite this, he and his crew continued to engage the Russians with high explosive ammunition. Despite their lack of penetrating power, these larger caliber shells were still able to inflict catastrophic battle damage on the enemy, and this was evident by the destruction of a further 5 Russian tanks. Finally, as they continued to take damage and risked losing their mobility, Staudinger's Tiger fell back. The Russian armoured attack had indeed been defeated in one of the most impressive bits of tank commanding ever seen in the Second World War. Over the course of the battle, his tank was hit by Russian 76mm gunfire an astounding 67 times, and yet was able to continue the fight and deliver its occupants to safety. Staudinger and his crew had not only destroyed 22 Russian tanks, but had played an invaluable role in halting the Russian attack. For this action, he was awarded the Knight's Cross as the first ever Tiger crewman to receive this award. If you're looking for the most popular and well-known tank ace of the war, Michael Wittmann is probably the name that comes to mind. He was awarded the Knight's Cross in January 1944 for his record of more than 90 enemy tanks destroyed. He amassed a total of 139 tank kills before his death in August 1944 during Operation Totalize. He also had a genius gunner, Balthasar Bobby Woll, who was very competent at shooting targets whilst the tank was moving at high speed. Perhaps the most famous victory accomplished by Michael Wittmann is one at Villa Bocage. He was stationed in France in 1944 as part of the defence force against the Allied invasion. At the time, Wittmann was trusted to guard the town of Villa Bocage together with 5 other Tiger tanks apart from his own. They were stationed near the town at the point codenamed Hill 213. The lead elements of the British 7th Armoured Division, the famous Desert Rats, were on the move, with one of their objectives being the taking of Villa Bocage. Wittmann didn't expect the Allies to arrive so soon. Even though they were undetected at the time the British tanks were approaching the town, it was clear that they would soon be spotted and overrun. The British took the village without a fight, but the following morning all hell broke loose. While the main bulk of the Allied column continued towards Hill 213, Wittmann organised a surprise attack. Alone, he proceeded to attack the rear of the column while the other 4 Tigers battled the British front. Wittmann caused mass panic by knocking out 8 Allied tanks and a number of half-tracks and anti-tank guns. He then charged the town of Villa Bocage. The element of surprise fueled his blitzkrieg even more as the Allies failed to respond quickly while Wittmann neutralised their tanks, suffering minimal damage. Accounts differ as to what happened next. Historians record that, following the destruction of the tanks, Wittmann duelled briefly without success with the Sherman Firefly before withdrawing. The Tiger is then reported to have continued eastwards to the outskirts of the town before being disabled by an anti-tank gun. However, Wittmann's own account contradicts this, stating that his tank was disabled by an anti-tank gun in the town centre. In less than 15 minutes though, 13 or 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns and 13 to 15 transport vehicles had been destroyed by the heavy SS Panzer Battalion 101, the vast majority attributed to Wittmann. One of many stories that I've been through in this short video that just showcase some of the extraordinary feats that we've seen in World War II. Sure, you can't really replicate these in Battlefield 5, nor would it be fair to have that happen. It's more of a campaign story than something that would be possible in multiplayer, but understanding it and knowing about it is important. I really feel as if DICE, as I said at the start of this video, could do with including some of these historical stories in Battlefield 5. Not only to educate the people that play it, but also because it's damn interesting, and that can be said for most stuff in the Second World War. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.